Hello, my lovelies. My name is Sadie and welcome to the first video at the start of this very exciting big project of 2022, Victorian Circus. So, in case you didn't watch my last video where I came up with this plan, what we're going to be doing is recreating an 1890s acrobat or aerialist costume. After we've made it, I'm then going to test it out on the silks, which is going to be so exciting. I should mention that aerial silks wasn't actually a discipline in 1890s circus. It wasn't actually seen to be mentioned in any kind of writing until 1959, which interestingly is exactly 100 years after the first ever mention of the flying trapeze act by Jules. I'm gonna butcher this. Jules Léotard, or as us English plebs would say, Jules Leotard. Yeah, so he pioneered the first trapeze act, and from then, various aerial acts came about. There were obviously trapeze artists, tumblers, there were people who did acrobatics on the back of horses, there were various disciplines involving ropes, which is the closest we're going to get to silks. However, the reason I mention this is because although different aerial disciplines certainly share skills, silks is quite a bit different in the fact that you're wrapping yourself up a lot in the fabric, and sometimes you get squeezed and twisted and all sorts of that kind of thing happening. So I will be bearing that in mind when I'm making design choices. However, we cannot make design choices before we have done some research, because I have no idea what these people would have worn. So let's go do some research. So I procrastinated this quite a lot because I had no idea where to start. Although, I managed to accidentally end up on a Zoom Q&A session with Bernadette Banner, which was actually meant for Patreons of a higher tier than me, but I wasn't complaining. So I actually asked her for some advice on where to go in order to research this. Obviously, she didn't have all that much experience in 19th century circus wear, but she did give me some really good resources in the kind of academic dress history field. And yes, during the conversation, I did turn bright red and got an instant headache afterwards from all the excitement. So don't meet your heroes, kids, because you might end up making a complete tit out of yourself. Ain't that just the way? So, armed with the names of some useful journals, dress history societies, etc., I took to the internet and found nothing. Turns out dress historians don't seem to be all that interested in circus wear of the 19th century. Or if they are, I can't access their research because there are a ton of paywalls involved in dress history societies and academic journals. And I currently do not have the means to shell out a ton of money to fund this research, so we're gonna have to make do with the free stuff. This jaunt wasn't completely useless because I did manage to find a big list of online collections in terms of like extant garments, objects, all of those kind of things. So I absolutely scoured those and similarly found nothing. Wait, I tell a lie, I did find like 2 things in the collection at the Victorian Albert Museum. It was an acrobat's costume from the late 19th century, but it specifically stated in its entry that this was the first and probably only one of its kind in the collection because it's so rare to find extant circus garments due to the fact that they were put through such rigorous wear. In fact, I have a book on the Theatre Crafts Book of Costume. Ugh. I thought this would be really useful because there is an interview about circus costuming. However, the guy who's being interviewed is like mid-20th century, so it's not really what I'm going for. But he does state, oh, this is Max Weldy, by the way. And Max Weldy states that the costumes last for 1 season. Unless there are accidents, and except for 1 or 2 numbers which are so tough that they use up more than 1 costume during a season. So I know this is like mid-20th century, but it's kind of a general indication of just how much stress these costumes were put under. And then once they've survived a season, they then have to survive like 130 years to make it to nowadays. It seems unlikely. So somewhat despairing, but still wanting to do primary research, I instead looked for circus posters. I will note that none of the posters that I am going to show you are going to involve tons of animal cruelty, because let me tell you, those ones were plentiful, but I don't really want to spread that kind of stuff on this channel. So never fear, we are only going to be showing Victorian fitties in skimpy outfits. So what I really want here is the music from the Vision On gallery, but copyright, so I guess I'll just However, as wonderful and numerous a resource as these post-its are, they are still subject to artistic license, a bit of interpretation here or there. Also, it's not like the artist could be like, right, cool, freeze, just hold it there, I'm just gonna draw you all mid-circus performance. Like, he would have watched it and then gone away and drawn it. Maybe done some initial sketches during it, but they're not the most reliable resource, although they are more reliable than anything we found so far. So what we needed is photos. And yeah, you can find a ton of Victorian circus performer photos on Pinterest, but they are completely unverifiable in terms of their source, their date, whether they even are an acrobat or someone in a fancy dress costume. So we need something a little more validated. So I did actually throw some money at this, but only a £5. I bought the Kindle edition of Beneath the Big Top, A Social History of the Circus in Britain by Steve Ward. Now I know this is secondary research, and actually, although it was very interesting, it didn't contain any of the stuff that I needed. However, at the back of the book there was a bibliography of tons of archives specifically related to the circus. So obviously I hightailed my way to some of those and found gold. It was, as Bernadette suggested, prudent to be looking in the field of academia, but just in a different area of study. The dress historians may not be interested in circus research, but the fairground and circus historians, funnily enough, are. The University of Sheffield in England and the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands particularly had amazing archives, just full of circus photos, and you can even like go through them and filter by decade. You could filter by subject of the photo, so I could get acrobats, aerialists, gymnasts, anything I wanted basically. And I finally found a photo that was good quality of an acrobat in costume and actually gave me some clarity on what I was looking at. And it was such a euphoric moment after so much despair on this research that it was actually quite something to behold. This is a reenactment of the moment when I found that first picture. Sweetie, oh my god. Oh, finally. No, that's not an exaggeration. That's what I actually sounded like. Sorry, upstairs neighbours. But that's what you get for constantly having really loud sex. So now we were armed with a veritable gold mine of photos of the time. Now we can just go through them and have a look at what these people were actually wearing. In the majority of photos, the acrobats were wearing some variation on this kind of loose top, tight ruched shorts look, sometimes as two separate garments and sometimes as an all-in-one. Others were wearing what looked like tight boned garments. Some were seemingly wearing knitted fabric that looked very figure-hugging, and of course there'll always be some people who dress completely differently, so we've got a lot to work with. So the battle may be won, but the war is not. Just because we know what they were wearing on the outside, more or less, does not tell us the whole story. As we know, Victorians liked to layer up. They had all sorts of underpinnings going on, which we very rarely get to see. So, running out of patience with what I could find online, I went to the good old-fashioned library. I wasn't actually able to take the book out because it was reference only, but I took plenty of pictures. I don't know if that's bad library etiquette, but So I found this book called English Costume and Sports for Outdoor Recreation from the 16th to the 19th centuries by Phyllis Cunnington and Alan Mansfield. Pretty perfect, right? This book is actually really good because it's not just some mid-20th century historians giving you their interpretation of what people actually wore. It has references to tons of primary sources, newspaper articles, books of the time. Can't think of any other primary resources right now, but they're in there. And so it was able to give me a pretty good picture of what people were wearing for sports, but not for acrobatics. It focused more on things like swimming, riding, climbing, running, more typical sports. However, I did pick up some general themes reading through the book. That is that what late 19th century sports people were wearing for underwear was by and large combinations. That is, not the typical chemise and drawers that you see throughout much of the earlier 19th century, but an entire unified garment, and particularly knitted combinations. Many authorities on sportswear at the time suggested that you wear entirely wool in your underlayers. This is because knitted wool was considered a fabric that was breathable and also would wick moisture away whilst not getting heavy and damp. I'm not sure how true this is by our standards nowadays. I certainly can't imagine doing silks in woolen underwear. I feel like I might get very hot, but such is the nature of experimental archaeology, I guess. So the issue we have with the regular combinations that most 19th century people were wearing for sports is the length. While I was reading through this book, I noticed that any mention of women was chiefly concerned with making sure women were well covered up whilst doing sports. Naturally, that meant many women were doing sports in long skirts. And if they were wearing trousers, they were very well disguised trousers, and it meant that you never really needed anything shorter than knee length in terms of your underwear. Combinations could even be completely full length, like down to the ankle, down to the wrist, like a onesie basically. Now from those photos and posters earlier, you can kind of see there was a mix of people who were wearing like tights or bare legs, and I have a feeling the ones who were wearing tights may have been wearing union suits and they just looked like tights because they were sort of poking out the bottom. So I think that's what I'm going to do. That is pretty much what our man, old Monsieur Leotard, wore when he was pioneering his trapeze act, and in fact that is where we get the term leotard for the very similar garment that we wear today. So I think rather than going bare-legged, because that is a very bad idea on silks, I've done it before and ended up with massive friction burns on the backs of my knees, I am going to go for like a full union suit that includes the feet, so it kind of looks like tights. However, I'm not going to be doing it down to the wrists, obviously, because you can see everyone's bare arms in the photos that we've seen. So it's kind of going to be like strappy up here and then like a full pair of tights on the bottom. This is incidentally quite reminiscent of what the male acrobats were wearing at the time. And by the way, I say male, I obviously mean male presenting. Like, if there is anywhere where there would have been diversity in gender identity, it's probably the circus, right? It kind of has a reputation for being home to outcasts, misfits, and people who challenge the status quo. In fact, during my research, I stumbled upon a performer called El Nino Farini, who was the supposed son of the circus proprietor. And El Nino Farini was also known as Lulu, as they used to dress up in more feminine acrobatic clothing and perform their trapeze artist as a woman. We're not entirely sure whether this was kind of just an act pushed by the parents in order to get more publicity, or if it was a personal choice. But either way, it's nice that the circus kind of gave people somewhere to express themselves like this, where it was more acceptable. So in these videos, if I talk about male costume, female costume, those kind of terms, I'm using verbal shorthand. I mean male presenting, female presenting, because I don't want to assume anything about the gender of the people in these photos, or indeed the gender of you lovely lot who may want to try out some of the costumes seen in these photos. Back to the design. So the next layer up is some kind of support garment. Now, in my book about sportswear, it did mention that some women preferred not to wear corsets at all when doing sports, and some women were recommended to wear flannel corsets, or even just like a flannel wrap, kind of like a binder. And we of course have the fairly famous Victorian sports corset that was appearing around this time. Personally, I want some kind of support when doing this because it's quite a rigorous activity, and I really want to make the sports corset, partly because I just want to make a corset, and partly because in a lot of these photos, the shapes that you're seeing, I find it hard to believe that they are the natural shapes of the performers. And this is difficult to tell because if there's anyone who's going to have that natural hourglass shape, it's somebody in peak physical fitness like a circus performer. But even so, like, I don't know man, some of those hip springs just look kind of unnatural without corsetry. So we'll see, but for now we're going to pop a corset on that design. And then we have the final layer. Obviously there's lots to choose from here, there are loads of different variations, but I kind of like the one which is the sort of the baggy top with the elasticated ruched shorts on the bottom. I'm not entirely sure whether I want it to be all in one or two separate garments. I'm going to make that decision further down the line. And of course, with each of these garments, I am going to be doing more research. I just kind of wanted to give you an overview today. So I think that's it. Oh, I forgot to mention shoes. I don't typically wear shoes when I do silks, but in almost all of the advertisements that I've seen, they're wearing shoes of some kind, normally like ballet-like shoes with little ribbons, that's the word, with the little ribbons going up round the leg, so we'll probably figure out something like that. So I think that's it. We have our lovely circus lady designed, and I am so excited to get started. I will also be interspersing the videos of each garment with other things, because I don't want to get bored, I don't want you to get bored, and there are some other things that I want to do before spring. So if you enjoyed my rambling and attempts at research, please give the video a like, do feel free to subscribe and all that jazz. If you got this far, I officially give you permission to go into the comments and roast me for my terrible pronunciation of Jules Léotard. Especially French people, I welcome your ridicule. So, I will see you next time for more chats, more crafts, and all of that good stuff. Bye! Okay, welcome back. My name is Sadie, and hello. Welcome. However, at the back of the book, there was a bibliography of tons of I don't know what I'm saying. So I could just go 1800 words. That is that sportsmen and women, and particularly because that is more or less what Jules Léotard wore.